Now, we think this high inflation environment will be very short-lived. And there's a number of factors that we can look to, and we in fact are seeing a lot of evidence that we are slowing down now. So the excessive stimulus that we saw through COVID-19 is really starting to tail off. If not, it's actually stopped. There's been a big change in the way that people are consuming as well. So through the COVID-19 crisis, services really dropped down. Services industry dropped down, and everybody surged into goods. They were buying TVs, they were buying couches. They weren't. They're buying pretty much everything other than using services, and that's really starting to switch around. And there's a really high energy and commodity prices that we're seeing. While energy prices are still quite high because of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, underlying commodity prices are really starting to tail off. And so we think that the deflationary environment that is good for our products, or the low growth and low inflation and low interest rates framework that we think is going to be most likely in the long run will continue. And we believe that this high inflation, high interest rate environment will be very, very temporary. And you can see some of the factors that we think will start becoming a lot more prevalent as we move through into the back end of this year into early next year.
Joel, can I just ask a question there? Because it's quite interesting. All the short-term inflation, I think everyone can see, the pandemic, the supply chain disruption, Ukraine, even the China lockdown, which is now lifted. And the thing I found quite interesting is about the deflation, disinflation story. We've seen that over a couple of decades now. But the aging population demographic change is quite an interesting one. Is that something you think will impact and continue that long, sort of low, slow inflation over the longer term, and why?
Yeah, it'd be low, slow deflation over the long term. The aging population doesn't consume like the growing population do. So they've done most of their consumption and they're moving off. And so the money that they're actually spending doesn't actually add a lot to the economy. It's actually a bit of a drag on the economy. They're leaving the workforce, they're saving their money more, they're not spending it on the services and goods that the rest of the population would. Plus, they're also a big drain on economies as well, for the healthcare, et cetera, and so on. And so there's a big change in demographic. And the younger demographic that's coming through consumes a lot differently. They're using software a lot more. They're using different services that don't have the same economic impact that the previous generations did. And we'll touch on that a little bit later near the end as well. But yeah, absolutely. The change in demographic is a slow freight train that's coming through the economies at the moment. And you'll probably hear a lot of people talking about it. It doesn't get enough, airplay is what it should do. But we really do see, global economies slowing, and we're seeing it now already. GDP growth around the globe is really starting to tail off from the highs that we saw through the pandemic. We're also starting to see underlying core inflation starting to roll off. Sure, headline inflation is going to be high because of energy prices, because of oil prices, because of food as a derivative of that, and rent rises will still be high. But the underlying drivers of the economy is really starting to look weak. Everybody forgets what the consumer was like in 2019. It was very, very fragile. And we're back there now, just with a lot more debt. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, through to the end of this year and early next year. I think this rate rise cycle that we're seeing, which is very aggressive, and it's good to see to try and keep a lid on inflation. You don't want them to go too far and you get yourself in a really sticky predicament where, you crush growth too much, even though it is tailing off now. And, a lot of those deflation factors will come into play and be a lot more prevalent depending on how far they go.